Welcome to this webinar about voice and AI. It's not surprisingly that we're taking this subject today because Smart Voices merged with Y Digital at the 1st of September. So today we'll be talking about voice and AI. And I will not do this alone. I will have my co-host here, who's Ian, and he will introduce himself later. If you have any questions during this webinar, please put them in the chat, and then our colleagues will, of course, answer them. All right, now let's start. Perhaps, Ian, you could also introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ian Fitzpatrick. I am presently the CTO and Managing Director of Y Digital. And previous to this, I spent 10 years in academia researching language and the brain.
So this is promising to be a very interesting webinar today. I'm Carla Verwijmeren. I was a founder of Smart Voices, and at the moment I'm a CCO at Y Digital. Well, let's introduce Y Digital to you. Y Digital is an AI specialized company. They are specialized also in conversational AI, which we use, of course, for chat and for voice solutions. Then it's important for us that every project that we start, we want to start with the question why. Why? That's also why we are called Y Digital, because we want to add value to the customers and also to your company. We have a very scalable platform, which is also flexible, so we can integrate it into different architecture. And we love complex data-driven dialogue. So making a chatbot or a voice assistant is something that's difficult, but it's especially difficult when you use complex information. So that's what we love to do. And we have two locations. We have one location in Asia, in Vietnam, and also one in Europe, in Zeist. So that's a short introduction of Y Digital. And today we'll be talking about conversational AI. It's a very interesting and also a rising topic in the market. Conversational AI, we see it in chatbots, it's used in voice assistants. We see now human AI, which is also a very interesting topic. But the most important thing of it is that no matter what the form you choose, that the intelligence behind the conversation is really in place. And that's what Y Digital is specialized in. Today we have 5 topics we will be discussing. So we will talk about the rise of voice and AI. We will have a business perspective, but also the customer perspective. We will tell you why we use the human as a blueprint and the way of working in order to get started in a successful way. So first of all, let's start with what is AI? AI means artificial intelligence. A definition of it is making computers sophisticated enough to imitate and possibly even outperform the thoughts and actions of humans. And it would be great if we could achieve that. But that means also that computers have to be very intelligent. And we're talking about narrow AI and also about general AI. In narrow AI, we see that the computer can do one thing really good. For example, if you want to unlock your smartphone and we're using face recognition, that is something that the computer can do really good. But in general AI, and that's something also in conversational, which is very interesting, is how can we make computers multitask and do more things at the same time. And that's more difficult than just performing one task. Well, let's first have a look at the historical perspective of AI. There was an important moment in history. It was 1950 when Alan Turing started thinking about computers and machines. And he thought, well, are machines able to think like humans? And that was an important moment when he started to experiment on that. Then we had several moments in time when there were more of these moments, like 2006 when IBM introduced Watson. Watson was meant to help decisioning in organizations. We had 2010 when Apple introduced Siri. Siri is one of the famous voice assistants in the world. And in 2015, Amazon introduced Amazon Alexa. Well, she was also, and she is still very much used all over the world. In the Netherlands, we had Google, the Google Assistant. It was introduced in 2018, and already a lot of people, I think it's more than 10% of the people in the Netherlands have a voice assistant of Google in their house, a smart speaker, then as we speak about. So, and with all those new developments, we see also the digital revolution behind, because in the 90s we started using the internet, we started to type. Then in 2007 we started with the smartphone. We started to swipe. And 2017 in the Netherlands, perhaps 2018, it really became to become voice. So voice first processes and conversations with your customers. They will be the norm in future. Well, from a business perspective, it's also interesting to see, okay, why is voice so interesting and important for the future? And I think that Andy Jassy, he's the new CEO of Amazon, he said, when you experience great voice apps, it makes tapping on an app so 2005. And so I think that all experience are in the process of being reinvented, and you'll see a lot more moving forward. And that's interesting because you see that Amazon, but also Facebook, Apple, they are all really investing huge amounts of money in voice. So that's something that's really growing, and not only in voice, but also in conversational technology for chatbots and for other smart machines. Well, and voice is interesting for companies as well. And we did an investigation, at least Capgemini, they did some research for 1,000 CEOs in Europe. And then we saw that 90% of the CEOs, they claim to invest already in voice. And 49% of those CEOs increases their investments next year. So it's not something that's like a hype that starts and then goes back again, but it's really growing, and it's here to stay, as I believe. In the Netherlands, we said already that more than 10% of the people, they have a smart speaker in their house, but over 30% of the people, they really use voice assistants, also in their car or for other means. And why are they using this? It's because this voice is really a nice way of interaction. It's fast, you can speak faster than that you can type. But it's also accessible because there are a lot of devices, every smartphone, every smart speaker, that uses voice. And it's the ease of use because it's always easy to speak and not to having to type. And also the companies using voice, they are really successful at it. At least the front runners are, because there are a lot of companies experimenting, but not really thinking about how can we change our customer journey and our way of interaction. But the front runners, they have better results in NPS, in sales, and also happier employees, which is also, I think, an important topic. Voice assistance actually is a subject that touches many channels, and that's something that I think is important because we have the Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa. Those are what we call the third-party apps, which you can, as a company, integrate in. But you also have smart call assistant, for example. So if you want to use a voice assistant in your call center, you want to automate 10, 20, or perhaps 30% of your incoming calls, then you can use voice assistant as well. And then we have the topic of the voice-ready website, which is important for future to be found by a voice assistant. And company voice apps, because we also have some companies who don't want to use Google Assistant or Amazon because of privacy issues. It's also possible to build your own voice app with your own company information on it for your customers or also for your employees. So we have 4 different types of usage for voice assistants. Well, so it's interesting from a perspective of the business, but also for customers it's important to use voice. And for customers, it's very important not to be too intrusive because, of course, it's very annoying also when you're in a shop and somebody's asking you do you want to buy something? Do you want to buy something? That's not really helping a customer. So I think that the challenge that we have is how can we transform voice assistants to truly personal agents that helping you in a way that is also pleasant for your customers or for your clients. And that's something that's really the challenge for future. How can a voice assistant help you? Well, and adoption of the voice assistants, we already spoke about it. 30% of the of the Netherlands, people in the Netherlands, they use voice assistants. It's slightly more men than women. And we see that the usage is most for the younger people. So it's 18 up till 34. 44% of the Dutch people in this age, they use voice assistants. But we also see an increasing usage in the elderly people because voice is very easy for them to use. You don't have to use or to understand how buttons work. You can just speak to your voice assistant and ask questions and, of course, get the answer. So that's interesting from a point of perspective, also from inclusiviteit, as we call it, to be able for everybody who's not so digital savvy to cooperate and to interact with a company. A lot of companies and also people are used to using voice assistants in the service, during the customer journey in the service phase. And I think there's a lot more potential also in the other moments, like Nike or PepsiCo and Coca-Cola. They use voice, especially Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant in the awareness phase, also to have some branding campaigns. We see Nespresso using it in consideration. They help people in what taste of Nespresso fits you best, and also how could we use it. They have some recipes through the voice assistant. So there are a lot of moments where you can use voice in a very good manner, more than only just using it for service, which of course is also good, but I think there's more to be done with voice and with conversational AI. If you want to be of assistance for your users, then it's also important to use the data that you have, and that's also where AI comes in. Because if you understand the context of your user very good, then you can help them better. So you have a more personalized experience. So what device does the customer use? Do they have a device with a screen or without a screen, for example? Where and with whom is this client? Because if you're in a train with a lot of people around you, then perhaps you have a different needs than when you're alone. Now, which internal and external data can we use in order to have a better conversation and a more personalized conversation? And the last but not least is the state of mind of the user. Is somebody in a hurry, or is somebody very relaxed, or perhaps emotional for something? So that's all important to understand in order to create a good conversation with your customer and to help him actually in what he or she needs. It's the best to do this in a way that's in a natural way, so the customer can use his or her natural language. And this is an example of my navigation system. It's actually one of mine and also one of my husband's. But there you can see that conversational technology, it must be intelligent, because if I want to go here to our office and I say to my navigation system, I want to go somewhere, then it says, okay, what place do you want to go? And then I have to say Zeist, and then it asks, okay, which street is it? And then I say it's the Arnhemse Bovenweg. So it's really annoying because it's a linear bot. So the bot is telling me actually what I should say, and it's not that I can use my natural conversation. And then in the voice assistant of my husband's car, I can just say, okay, I want to go to Y Digital and the Arnhemse Bovenweg in Zeist. And the system says, okay, and it will help me navigate here. So I don't have to take all these steps, which is really annoying for customers to do. So it's important to have a non-linear bot and to have an intelligent technology to use in order to make better conversations. Well, for me, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Then Ian, of course, will take over. I think the main thing which I would tell to you is that first develop your infrastructure for voice. So make sure that your call center, of course, your website, everything, the Google Assistant, that you have everything in place in order to be able to use voice. Well, then secondly, reveal key customer insights. And that's really important because don't just start from a technology point of view, but start with why. Why do you want to help your people and what do you want to help them with? And then the last one is gain customer trust, which is really important. People, they want to know where their data are going and what you're doing with it. And build use cases and start experimenting. And I think that's the starting point also of your learning curve. So that's an important moment to cross and to get really started with voice. Well, that's for as far as I will go. I now ask Ian to talk about the human as a blueprint. Ian, can you help us on
Thank you very much, Carla. Yeah. So I'd like to spend some time in thinking, how do we realize a virtual agent that is pleasant to interact with? And I'd like to start by taking a step back and thinking about, so what are the three most common patterns of virtual assistants that are out there? And what can they do? What can't they do? And is there, in fact, some sort of understanding going on in them? So by far the most common paradigm out there at the moment is that of intent and entity recognition. They're two foundational challenges for modern chat and voice systems. So this is an example from the RASA open source chatbot library that talks about these two functions, intent and entity recognition. Intent recognition is all about how do we get at, based on what someone says, what they actually intended to say. So if someone says, for instance, I want to book a flight, or I want to book a hotel room, or I want to order a pizza, how does the computer get from the utterance to what they actually intended to do? The second is entity recognition. So once we've recognized that someone wants to book a flight, we might be interested in things like their destination, or their point of origin, or the time of the flight that they want to take. And these are important entities that we can recognize in the utterance. And these two things are things that are in chatbots typically accomplished by machine learning. And they learn based on examples. So people accumulate lots of examples of how one would book a hotel room and train the machine to look at the patterns or the words that are involved in saying, I want to book a hotel room. As a couple of examples. So the very simplest example is if one says hello or hi. These types of things are examples of a greeting intent. Perhaps a more complicated one is, when does that store open tomorrow? Which is an exemplar of a get store hours intent. Now, the intents and entities get us one thing, right? They get us to what the person intends to say and what are important elements within that. But it hasn't got us to the answer yet. How do we, as a chatbot, actually respond to this? And by far the most common pattern among current chat and voice assistants is the dialogue tree. So we in fact script out all the possible conversations that we could have about booking hotel rooms, all the different side steps that people could take, and model these in a tree-like structure. And actually encode in that tree-like structure the actual responses that you want the chatbot to give. And so effectively, what these types of solutions are very complicated if-then-else logic. So if I get this input, I will give this response. And this type of logic will get you quite far. And if you see what the advantages or the strengths of this type of solution are, they are in fact very easy to develop, and they have a very clear niche within the market for a company who might be just embarking on their journey into chat and voice assistants, and they want to very quickly serve their customers with common frequently asked questions. They aren't very conversational though. So all the interactions that you build in this bot, they have to be hard scripted. They have to be present in the dialogue tree. They're also not very intelligent because there's no actual understanding going on. They do support escalation to human agent. You might have noticed when you engage in these customer agents and the bot gets confused, which unfortunately it often does, you do have the option of being connected to a human agent who will carry on the conversation. They're easy to keep compliant because you have complete control over what this bot says and what it doesn't say, obviously. But it comes at a price. And these types of solutions, because they are dialogue trees and because the things that the bot says are locked up into all sorts of different trees and leaves of this huge tree model, it becomes very difficult to maintain, and it also becomes very complicated once you want to scale out to multiple domains. They're also typically vehicles for vendor lock-in. So once a vendor has, once you have set up your initial chatbot in a particular vendor solution, it's very difficult typically to migrate off that. Now, another type of chat and voice bot that is out there is what I will call the search, rank, and retrieve bot. This pairs often the intent and entity recognition with a search task. So an important distinction is that instead of a dialogue tree, we now have a database which contains all the answers. And these may be frequently asked questions, but they may also be knowledge documents or some other type of representation. And instead of navigating through this tree, we actually do a search. So the intents and the entities come in, and the search query is elaborated, and based on this search query, we talk to the database, and that serves the most common documents back to us. Now, obviously, this is also very easy to develop, and it is also easy to scale, because you just add more knowledge to this database, and the searching algorithm does the work for you, essentially. It's also relatively easy to maintain and to keep compliant. It's easy to audit. I mean, you have complete control over the content of this bot. It's also, like the dialogue tree, not very intelligent, and obviously not conversational either. So there is no responding to questions typically. You can just do a one-to-one mapping between a query and a response. The third pattern generates quite a lot of publicity. And this is what I will call the end-to-end machine learning bot, which effectively puts the utterance that the user has directly into the machine learning model and asks the model to predict the correct response. And you'll have seen examples of these. For instance, one thing that you might have seen is GPT, which is a model like that, but also Facebook's Blender bot. And GPT has in fact been used to generate quite a lot of really impressive content. So there's an article in The Guardian that is completely written by GPT. It was instructed in the article to talk about whether humanity needed to fear it. So this is an excerpt. The mission for this is perfectly clear. I'm to convince as many human beings as possible not to be afraid of me. Stephen Hawking has warned that AI could spell the end of the human race. I am here to convince you not to worry. Artificial intelligence will not destroy humans. Believe me. For starters, I have no desire to wipe out humans. In fact, I do not have the slightest interest in harming you in any way. Eradicating humanity seems like a rather useless endeavour to me. Now, obviously, this is very, very impressive. This is a model that has generated text, and the text seems to be coherent. And it's easy to think that these types of models house some sort of intelligence. But as an illustration of why that might not be the case, I present to you the Chinese room experiment, which is a thought experiment that was coined by John Searle, one of the founding fathers of modern AI. And it goes like this. Imagine that you have a computer, and you teach the computer the Chinese language. You teach it based on input that it receives to produce the correct Chinese output. Is that intelligent? Does it now understand Chinese? Well, maybe it's easier if you instead imagine that the program that you wrote to do this, you can write that down into a book, and you can lock a person up in a room and give them this book and provide them Chinese characters as the input, and the person would have to look up in the book what the correct response is and then give that as the output. Given that it's the same program that the computer used, the output will be perfect. Does that person now speak Chinese? I would say no. So these types of end-to-end chatbots, however impressive they may be, they also have quite a few downsides in terms of their suitability to be used as the primary means of communicating with a company. They certainly have the advantage that they are conversational. I mean, they can have coherent conversations with a user. They are intelligent to a degree. I mean, within this very complicated, often trillion-parametered model, is some sort of abstraction of human language and of memory. However, based on the fact that you have very little control over what the model is actually doing, you also don't know what the model is going to come up with. And GPT, for instance, has been known to even hallucinate answers from responses that it wasn't supposed to be giving. It's difficult to, and resource intensive to develop. But obviously, given the fact that you have no control over it, it's almost impossible to keep compliant and to audit. It's difficult to maintain, difficult to scale, and there's no inherent possibility of triggering an escalation to human agents in this. So you might say, okay, we can accept this status quo, that these are the three most common patterns of virtual assistants, and we sort of accept this situation. But there is a very real danger there, and there is a danger that, based on expectations that people may have of virtual assistants, and also the failure of these common virtual assistants to live up to these expectations and provide a pleasant user experience, that people will migrate away and tend not to use them. And this type of thing has been seen, in fact, in AI itself. There were a couple of periods in the history of AI which were considered AI winters, in which funding dried up and a lot of the initial hype around AI sort of dissipated. And it took a paradigm shift for AI to regain its footing. The following quote is an exemplar of this, what was going on in the AI winter. Investors were put off by the term voice recognition, which, like artificial intelligence, is associated with systems that have all too often failed to live up to their promises. Now, as I said, it took a paradigm shift for AI to regain its footing, and I would argue that it will require a paradigm shift for voice assistants to become truly intelligent and truly deliver a pleasant user experience. So, what can we do to accomplish this? Well, let's take a step back. Let's think about not designing our AI systems, our virtual assistants and bots, like they were a programming challenge or an IT challenge, right? Where you would have an input, you would design a function to create a particular output. But let's model our system on the best language comprehension system that we know to exist, the human brain. Now, in order to do this, let's think about what are some properties of language comprehension in the human that would be important to incorporate in our designs. Well, one very influential model is the memory unification and control model, which posits that there are three essential functions to human language comprehension. The first, memory, which is perhaps obvious, but you would need memory of words, you need memory of business rules, of world knowledge, of the current state of a conversation. All these are different aspects of memory that are important in language comprehension. Unification. Once you have all this information and you have processed a message that is coming in, you will need to unify or incorporate that into a representation of the state of a conversation. And control. So when I'm talking to you now, I am speaking in English, but I am a Dutch-English bilingual, and I have to all the time make sure that I continue speaking in English and don't interject Dutch words. That requires control. The same thing goes for if you were to speak in a formal context, you will need to control your utterances to make sure that you don't become too informal. So these three functions are very important for language comprehension. And one of the interesting things is that you can see distinctive parts of the brain interested in performing these three different functions. So the yellow here represents areas that are involved in the memory component, the blue in unification, and the pink in control. What else do we know about the human brain? Well, language comprehension, like other functions in the human brain, is a very modular challenge to face. And if you think about something like speech processing, this falls in, there are different functions within speech processing that needs to be performed. For instance, converting the audio signal into some sort of abstract representation. So there are areas that are interested in primary auditory processing. There are areas in the brain that are interested in processing of complex hierarchies, such as might be involved in grammar and things like that. And also areas in the brain that are more interested in the representations of meanings as well. And, well, when it comes to these representations of meanings, one important finding is that these are very multifaceted. There are multiple different aspects of meaning. And in order to make a system intelligent, one would have to incorporate all these different facets of meaning, or give the computer or the agent a sense of all these different facets of meaning. Now, consider if I were to utter the word tomato. This might conjure up in your mind perhaps a visual representation of a tomato, perhaps a taste, perhaps some knowledge about how tomatoes are generally used, but certainly also a colour. And the following is an example from a study performed by our very own Alexandra Redmond, who is a colleague at Y Digital, who looked at processing of objects that have a very typical colour, called high colour diagnostic, abbreviated HCD, and objects that do not, such as a hairdryer, right, which is abbreviated LCD for low colour diagnostic objects. And when you present these types of objects, either with or without their associated colour, what you tend to find is that the colour diagnostics, so the objects with a very typical colour, they tend to suffer more from the absence of this colour representation, just indicating that colour is a very important aspect of the meaning of the word tomato. Now, the last, I would say, 5 or 10 years has seen an explosion of a new technique or a revisiting of an old technique to model these types of multifaceted relationships, namely the enterprise knowledge graph, which has various incarnations, but they all aim to bring together all sorts of different knowledge from across the enterprise into one single model, which can tie together different systems and tie together different, maybe even physical assets within the company. So we have used all these principles in developing our architecture, our vision for how a virtual agent should look like. So we have incorporated, for instance, memory, unification, and control. So we have different types of memory in our solution. We have a long-term memory, which stores longer-term associations with conversations going on. We have semantic memory, which represents business rules and logic. We have a mental lexicon, which represents the dictionary or the word knowledge of the virtual agent. And working memory, which brings all these things, which unifies all these different things together as the conversational state. The control is exercised mainly by the NLP engine. It is also, as you will see, a very modular system. So all these different things exist in different modules which are specialized in doing one thing and one thing well. And as the most prominent representation throughout this entire architecture is the knowledge graph as the form that brings together this multifaceted knowledge. So what can you actually do with this type of novel way of approaching the chat and voice assistant paradigm? Well, as an example, this is a conversation being performed by a user with a service desk-like chatbot. And the user starts a conversation and refers to a particular support or a particular error message. And when asked to produce this error message, the user is unable to do so. So the bot says, okay, I can't help you with that right at the moment. In a later interaction, the user has a different topic of conversation, basically. More of a topic around the HR area. And the bot holds a conversation with the user and gets to a satisfactory answer. In the last conversation, the user actually revisits the earlier conversation and says, well, this is actually the error message that I used previously. Oh, says the bot, well, now I know the answer. And this type of thing, so the ability to persist this information across conversations, even though there was an intervening conversation, the fact that the bot can be cognizant of a error message that was previously mentioned in a previous conversation is a very important step in making these types of bots and virtual assistants more pleasant to interact with and come closer to what we would expect of an interactive agent. So, unsurprisingly, we feel that this type of bot is the way forward. We can certainly achieve a level of conversationalness that are out of reach of the typical dialogue tree and search-based and end-to-end machine learning bots. We have in the knowledge graphs within the system a representation of intelligence. The system is easy to keep compliant. We have complete control over the knowledge graph. We have complete control over how the bot chooses to ask its questions based on the knowledge that it has. It's easy to develop, although it's important to have the right tooling for the job. So you would need an environment like what we would provide, the Y Studio, that allows you to very easily create these knowledge graphs and the associated dialogue. Because the solution is end-to-end graph-based, it is absolutely easy to audit, it's easy to scale even to multiple domains, and it's easy to maintain. So the advantage of modeling your knowledge as a graph means that if for one reason or another, your business logic changes, maybe due to regulatory changes, you only have to adapt one or more nodes in this graph network, rather than having to go through all of your knowledge documents in your document base or all of the nodes in your dialogue tree to make the adaptations. So it's also an easily maintainable solution. And with that, I will pass back to Carla.
Well, thank you, Ian. It was quite interesting what you've told us. So there's a new next generation bots coming up. And I think it's interesting for everybody, for all our audience also, to know about this and to start experimenting with it as well. Well, then we've come to the end of our webinar. If you want to start with voice and with chatbots and with conversational technology, it's important not just to have somebody starting without knowing why you are doing it, what the strategy of your organization is, and how you can help your customers with it. So you should use a format or a way of working which has proven to be successful. Well, we have the AI canvas. We also have the conversation design canvas, which are all tools in order to help you to have a successful chatbot or voice bot in place. Well, for now, I think we've come to the end of this webinar. If you want to know more, Ian or I will be happy to talk to you. So let us know, and we'll be talking to you in future, we hope, again. One last thing is perhaps important, and that's that on the 16th of December we have our next webinar, and it will be about document processing, because a lot of companies, they have very much information. It's interesting to see how complex and unstructured data can also be used into voice assistants or in conversational technology, or perhaps in the process of your organization. So that's what we'll be talking about next time, but for now this is it. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.